Han Li felt numbed as fear, regret, and helplessness filled his heart. Despite trying to delay the inevitable, he was still unable to figure out how to extricate himself from this predicament, and as a result, he grew panicked. He was, after all, still very young, unable to win against Dr. Mo's vast years of experience in Jiang Hu. Dr. Mo could most likely counter any cunning and ruthless method that Han Li came up with. Feeling as exposed as a paper tiger, Han Li started sweating profusely. Dr. Mo took note of the myriad expressions that flashed past Han Li's face and was immensely satisfied with the pressure he caused. From his experiences, only when one was unsettled and confused would it be easier to extract the truth. You really think that I was delaying my cultivation on purpose? Han Li was surprised that Dr. Mo came to this conclusion. Obviously. It's already been 2 years and yet you weren't able to reach the 4th layer? You really think I can't read what you're thinking? In the past, you only spent 3 years reaching the first 3 layers, so even if the 4th layer was difficult to cultivate without the aid of spiritual herbs, it would be impossible for you to have no progress in your cultivation, Dr. Mo explained as his eyebrows arched up, emitting a killing intent. It was as if all the dissatisfaction that he ever felt was bubbling out to the surface today. Seems like no matter how I try to explain, Dr. Mo will never believe me. Han Li smiled bitterly. Never would he have thought that trying to hide the progress of his cultivation would lead him into a deeper hole filled with Dr. Mo's endless suspicion. He really kicked the stone on which he had placed himself. Enough. I have no wish to listen to any more of your bullshit. I shall give you 1 more year. Do you think you will be able to reach the 4th layer by then? Dr. Mo coldly laughed as he stared icily at Han Li, waiting for his answer with a serious expression on his face. Han Li's mind was very clear. He knew his answer would not only affect Dr. Mo's life but also his own survival. I should be very clear that there is no way I will be able to say no. Come, unlock my acupoints. Han Li relaxed as he accepted the inevitable. After Dr. Mo heard his words, his face recovered slightly as praise reflected in his eyes. However, he did not unlock Han Li's acupointment immediately. Instead, he took out an exquisitely carved sealed box from within his robes. I can't be assured by your words alone. What would happen if you say one thing but do another? If you refuse to invest any effort in your cultivation, there would not be any difference from now. Because my own life is at stake, I have to add another layer of insurance, stated Dr. Mo in an icy tone. Before opening Han Li's acupoints, Dr. Mo had to take extra measures to ensure his success. He cautiously unsealed the box, revealing a white pill laying in its center, before unsealing Han Li's acupointment. Before Han Li could move, Dr. Mo had already thrust the box in front of him. You are an intelligent person. There is no need for me to waste time talking too much, you should know what to do. Dr. Mo looked at him, harboring malicious intents in his heart. Han Li moved his numbed limbs about, and without saying anything, he took the white pill out from the box. In front of Dr. Mo, Han Li immediately placed the white pill inside his mouth and swallowed it, unwilling to show any signs of weaknesses. Clap clap. Excellent. He who suits his action to the times are great men indeed. As long as you help me return back to normal, I will reward you greatly. There is already a rift between us, so it is impossible for me to accept you as my disciple and pass on to you other techniques, but still, granting you a life of wealth is still possible for me. Dr. Mo clapped his hands as he sincerely promised Han Li his reward. Now, you should be able to tell me the effect of the pill I just consumed in case I accidentally overstep the restrictions and lose my life, Han Li expressionlessly asked Dr. Mo. Keek, the name of this pill is the insect corpse pill. It's concocted from pure herbal components, but in addition, the recipe requires different poisonous worm eggs. After being consumed, it will incubate inside your body for a year. You can rest assured, though. In this 1 year, I can guarantee that it will not affect you. After 1 year, Once you consume the antidote, the pill will melt away, leaving no traces behind. However, if you do not consume the antidote after a year, the worm will hatch within your body and consume your innards for nourishment, eating you from inside out and leaving you in so much pain that you would rather die than suffer the agony. The pain will last for a total of 3 days and 3 nights, and you will slowly die an agonizing death. Dr. Mo slowly explained the effects of the pill as he silently warned Hanli. After Hanli heard the effects of the pill he just consumed, shudders involuntarily spread throughout his body as his expression changed for the worst. Anger inflamed his heart, but before he could do or say anything, Dr. Mo unleashed his trump card. "Oh right, I heard that your family is living pretty well thanks to you. Do they have enough silvers to spend? If not, just let me know. Since you'll be doing me a great favor, I will specially take care of your family members for you." Dr. Mo smiled as he patted Hanli's shoulder. Hanli froze as his face turned green. Dr. Mo's words made it impossible for his spirit to be calm and still. Using the last vestige of his determination, he gritted his teeth and forced himself to keep silent. He was worried that he would say something to Dr. Mo that he might regret. Hanli understood that there was no way Dr. Mo would not use his family against him. "Don't worry, Dr. Mo. I promise to reach the 4th layer within a year." Without a choice, Hanli bit his lips as he assured Dr. Mo. Under Dr. Mo's threats, Hanli could only submit. He was still unable to sever the last trace of humanity in his heart and disregard the life and death of his parents. Now, Hanli's weakness had been grasped by Dr. Mo, and even if he wished to die, he would still have to seek the approval of Dr. Mo. Hanli knew that he had been thoroughly defeated this time. After Dr. Mo heard Hanli's words, he released a sigh of relief. His nervousness was not less than Hanli's, but Dr. Mo's face was akin to a stone mask as he had managed to keep his emotions under tight control. The eternal spring arts are indeed extraordinary. This young brat is still young but is already so difficult to handle. Dr. Mo did not know whether he felt envy or jealousy in his heart. Actually, the effects of the eternal spring arts varied for those who cultivate it. As for Hanli, he had already been quite intelligent since he was young, so after cultivating the eternal spring arts, his wisdom grew beyond his peers. Hanli turned his body as he prepared to leave. When he reached the entrance, he asked a final question. Ever since he arrived, the brother standing behind Dr. Mo has not said a single word. Where did he come from? After hearing Hanli's question, Dr. Mo deigned not to answer and only replied with a cunning laugh. "You are so intelligent, why don't you take a guess? I'm sure you will be able to find out." Hanli shook his head and proceeded to leave Dr. Mo's residence. It was unknown whether he was just unwilling to make a guess or unable to get the correct answer. After he stepped out of the door, Hanli's expression turned heavy and downcast. "In this conflict between Dr. Mo and I was as helpless as a baby chick, completely under his control. I was really too naive, thinking that my small amount of cleverness would be able to outfox him. In the end, the 5 poisons water that I concocted was unable to display its full might and was wasted. When I return, I must seriously think about how to best increase my strength." Thinking of this, he turned to the direction of his residence and began walking in large strides. He appeared to be extremely unwilling to be controlled by Dr. Mo. Back at Dr. Mo's residence, Dr. Mo stared dumbstruck at the floor. There was a bowl-sized hole cut out on the wood panels. Just now, due to his carelessness, he almost died to the poison that had corroded the floor. Because the poison was so potent, Dr. Mo could not help but curse in anger. That son of a turtle, when did he learn to concoct such a deadly poison? I never taught him anything like this before. It seems like I have underestimated him. He can be extremely cruel and merciless, even to the extent that he can turn his back on old associates. Hanli did not know that he had caused such a great shock to Dr. Mo. After returning to his room, he slumped his head on his bed as sleep overtook him. The battle of strength and wits had exhausted him, and thus, he needed rest to recover. After a long period of time, Han Li slowly roused himself from his sleep as he sat up and looked to the skies. Dawn was already approaching. It seemed as if he had slept much longer than he expected. The Han Li who had awakened did not get off from his bed immediately. Sitting on his bed and resting his chin on both of his hands, he started analyzing ways to escape from Dr. Mo's control. Obviously, he was safe for this 1-year period. Because Dr. Mo needed to protect his own life, he would certainly not make any moves against him within this period of time. But after the year passed, it would be hard to guarantee anything. Han Li did not worry about the problem of the eternal spring arts. He had already broken through to the 4th layer a few days ago, and was even extremely confident that he could reach the 5th level after a year, thus he did not need to worry about it anymore. The problem of the insect corpse pill was easily settled as well. When the time came, Han Li would just need to stop suppressing his true abilities and simply wrestle the cure away from Dr. Mo. All of a sudden, Han Li thought of something. He pulled out a medicinal bottle and took from it a jade-green medicinal pill before consuming it. After a while, the effect of the medicine took place as he silently observed himself inwardly. Dr. Mo did really tell the truth about the insect corpse pill. The pure spirit powder, which is a panacea for most of the world's poisons, was unable to have any effect when consumed to combat the effects of the insect corpse pill. It seems like I must really wait for a year before I can obtain the antidote. Han Li murmured. He got down from his bed and paced around his room, trying to think of other alternatives to his problems. Han Li did not completely believe the words that Dr. Mo had told him earlier. Despite this, he had no choice but to comply to Dr. Mo's demands because he held Han Li's weakness in his palm. Han Li was unsure if Dr. Mo's promise was real. If it was real, it was simple as merely following Dr. Mo's instructions. Han Li would be assured and would have no need to come up with any preparations. But if Dr. Mo was lying to him, Han Li knew that he would probably suffer a fate worse than death a year from now if he did not prepare any countermeasures. Han Li repeatedly analyzed all of the possible ways to attack his problem and felt that there weren't any good solutions. Now both Han Li and Dr. Mo were in dire straits. Han Li was afraid that Dr. Mo would harm him after he accomplished his objective. On the other hand, Dr. Mo was worried that Han Li might not practice his cultivation assiduously and that the delay would cost him his life. Initially, Han Li had some methods that he could use to threaten Dr. Mo, but who would have expected that Dr. Mo would grasp his weaknesses so quickly and use his family as insurance? Could it be that I don't even have the slightest control over my own life? Han Li helplessly sighed. No, there is no way that I would allow this to happen. Leaving my destiny in the hands of another would undoubtedly be the most foolish decision I have ever made. Despite saying so, even after contemplating for a long period of time, Han Li was still unable to think of any good solution. Eventually, he decided on a solution that wasn't exactly a solution. He decided to increase his strength in every aspect. Even if Dr. Mo wanted his life 1 year from now, Han Li would still have some insurance against Dr. Mo. This was truly a stupid idea. He could only passively defend and could not actively attack. But currently, he could not think of any other way besides increasing his own strength. After making his decision, Han Li decided to go out for a walk. He opened his door and walked outside his residence, stretching his body while yawning. Han Li hoisted up a rope attached to a bucket and threw the bucket into the mountain spring. Once the bucket was filled to the brim with spring water, he pulled it back up. Without expending any strength, Han Li easily lifted the wooden bucket above his head, and with a flick of his wrist, a hua sound rang out as the water in the bucket poured over his head, drenching him all the way to his toes. How refreshing! How comfortable! Han Li and another youth both exclaimed in delight. The water was soothing in the hot summer weather. The heat was unbearably hot, so as they poured spring water over their bodies, they shivered in delight. Heh. Junior Disciple Han, you really found a good place. This creek was well hidden, and yet you somehow managed to discover it, the youth with a callous look on his face suddenly stated. This is nothing. There are even more remote places that are harder to discover. I have only managed to find a few, but it's a pity that none of the locations I found had spring water as magnificent as this one, the other youth straightforwardly replied. The youth who replied was Han Li, and the one with the callous expression was none other than Li Feiyu. Ever since Li Feiyu obtained the first delivery of pain-relieving medicine from Han Li and tested them, he found that the medicine's effectiveness was extremely good. One dose diminished the backlash caused by the essence extraction pill by a great amount. After experiencing Han Li's pain-relieving medicine, Li Feiyu couldn't live without it. Whenever he didn't use the medicine, he would suffer a painful backlash from the essence extraction pill. Although Han Li had given him a year's supply of pain-relieving medicine, Li Feiyu had completely used up his supply within a few short months. Facing the pain of the backlash that almost broke his limits, Li Feiyu had no choice but to thicken his skin and ask Han Li for help. The current Han Li wanted to increase his own strength, so he used Li Feiyu's needs to his own advantage. After knowing that Li Feiyu was selected to enter the 7 Supreme Division, Han Li asked Li Feiyu for secret skills stored in the 7 Supreme Division in exchange for pain-relieving medicine. The usually silent Li Feiyu agreed immediately upon hearing Han Li's request. In order to not let others discover the secret agreement between him and Li Feiyu, Han Li decided to explore the celestial Rainbow Mountain for a remote location where they could do their trade in private. The two of them decided to secretly meet up after a set amount of time. In their secret location, Han Li would hand over the pain-relieving medicine to Li Feiyu, and Li Feiyu would teach Han Li some of his secret arts that he gained from the 7 Supreme Division. Just like this, they were both extremely satisfied by their trade, which continued for half a year. Li Feiyu and Han Li had taken to each other during this half year. Unknowingly, they became close friends that could talk about anything under the sun. Li Feiyu was very satisfied with the spot Han Li found, especially the small creek it contained. They stood in a medium-sized depression surrounded by tall mountain peaks. In order to gain access to it, they had to crawl on their hands and feet through an extremely narrow tunnel. Most importantly, this place had a flowing spring, which they had access to during the unbearably hot summer. After they exercised and bathed themselves in the cool mountain spring water, they felt an incomparable sense of comfort and satisfaction. Once they were done washing themselves, Han Li glanced at Li Feiyu and asked, "Earlier, you taught me the ferocious serpentine strike. Although it's a formidable technique, it is too vicious, so I don't think it is suitable for me. Are there any other techniques that are more gentle?" Junior Disciple Han, do you really think that I am the only disciple in the 7 Supreme Division, or that I can learn whatever I wish to learn? I could only select a small amount of techniques to study. Not to mention, my martial arts has always been overbearing in nature, so of course I would pick a formidable hard technique. Li Feiyu explained to Han Li, exasperated by his request. Senior Disciple Li is the leader amongst all the disciples. How could you be comparable to the normal disciples in the 7 Supreme Division? Noticing hints of anger, Han Li unabashedly began to praise Li Feiyu. It is not so simple, but to think that I actually managed to make our great genius Han sing songs of praises. Li Feiyu smiled as he teased Han Li. What genius? I'm always defeated by you after a few moves. Hung. That was because I used my true chi to execute my techniques. There is nothing to boast of. If I did not use my true chi, I'm afraid that I would definitely lose to you within 100 moves. Is there even anyone who doesn't use their true chi when fighting? Senior Disciple Li is too humble. Humble? I'm not humble at all. You did not start learning martial arts until recently and had never sparred with anyone before. The only thing you learned was some useless oracular formula. To think that within such a short span of time, you have already comprehended the intricacies of each martial technique that I taught you. If you are not a genius, then who is? That oracular formula seems to have no effect on increasing your might, so why are you still assiduously practicing it every day? Han Li bitterly smiled to himself as he thought, you think that I want to learn this? Right now, I might as well be riding on top of a tiger. Even if want to stop practicing it, Dr. Mo wouldn't let me. Junior disciple Han, I'm not saying this just for the sake of talking. Based on the talent you displayed this past half a year, I know that you have great potential. I strongly urge that you discard the stupid oracular formula and concentrate on learning martial arts techniques with me. I dare to guarantee that you would only need a span of 2 years to become strong enough to everyone. I have no doubts that after 2 years, both you and I will dominate the Seven Mysteries sect. Li Feiyu tried persuading him. Han Li felt somewhat moved in his heart. Although Li Feiyu had said these words many times, making Han Li feel irritated, the senior disciple did have some good points. Not only that, Li Feiyu sincerely cared for Han Li's future. Han Li shook his head, showing his rejection of the idea, and quickly changed the topic. In the 7 Supreme Division, are there any supreme martial arts techniques that restrict opponents without consuming true qi? Li Feiyu, seeing how quickly Han Li changed the topic, stopped trying to persuade him. He didn't want to force Han Li since he knew that Han Li was the same as him, a keeper of a secret that he wanted to keep hidden. Li Feiyu lowered his head to ponder before mentioning, there is indeed a strange sword technique that does not require true qi to execute, but what? The moment Han Li heard that there was a technique he could use, he was overjoyed and quickly asked for more information. This particular set of sword techniques has been passed down in the 7 Supreme Division for over 100 years, but there has never been a disciple who was able to successfully master it. Even the elder who created this technique passed away before mastering it. This technique is known as the blinking sword art. Don't you think that the name for this technique is bizarre? Blinking sword art. Han Li murmured. That's right. What do you think the set of sword techniques has in common with eyes blinking? Isn't the name funny? Have you practiced this set of sword techniques before? Han Li asked curiously. Of course not. Who would practice such a useless set of sword arts? It's all form and no power. Ever since this sword technique was created, no one has chosen to practice it, let alone me, senior disciple Li. I was told that if the creator of the set of sword techniques hadn't saved the sect leader's life countless times and left a will for it to be placed inside the 7 Supreme Division, the 7 Supreme Division wouldn't have even considered storing this type of swordplay. With his cold countenance, Li Feiyu was someone whom Han Li would never have thought of as a big mouth. Who would have thought that Li Feiyu would list all of the techniques and stances for this particular sword art before Han Li opened his mouth to speak? Li Feiyu would only act in this manner when privately facing Han Li. In the presence of a disciple other than Han Li, he would revert back to the cool senior disciple Li who was revered by every other disciple. After hearing Li Feiyu speak, Han Li's intuition told him that this was the technique he was looking for. Senior disciple Li, could you copy the set of sword techniques from the 7 Supreme Division and bring it to me? He. No problem. If you were to ask about any other martial arts, I might not be able to guarantee success since there would be people guarding it. But as for the blinking sword art, you can count on me. However, copying it is too much of a hassle, so I will just steal the original book for you. Once you record the techniques listed down, just give it back to me, and I will stealthily return it to its original location. This way, no one would notice its absence. Li Feiyu nonchalantly made a bold suggestion. Han Li felt that Li Feiyu was very confident about this, and as such, agreed to his suggestion. Initially, Han Li was concerned that Li Feiyu might accidentally overlook or miss a portion of the technique when copying it down, but since he wanted to steal the original copy of the technique, Han Li could be more at ease. It's getting late. I should go back and practice my martial arts. If not, the 7 Supreme Division might discover that I sneaked out. Li Feiyu dried his body and donned his clothes in preparation to leave Han Li's secluded mountain hideout. Before Li Feiyu left, Han Li reminded him to be cautious when stealing the sword technique manual. After Li Feiyu left, Han Li returned back to God Hand Valley as well. Upon stepping inside the valley, Han Li could see the mysterious figure that Dr. Mo brought back from afar, standing motionlessly as a guard outside of Dr. Mo's residence. It was as if the summer heat did not affect him in the slightest way. Han Li, as he neared the entrance of his own residence, halted his steps and glanced at the silent, mysterious man guarding Dr. Mo's doorstep. Ever since Dr. Mo threatened him, Han Li had felt an extreme interest regarding what the mysterious figure looked like underneath his hood. Han Li had never heard him speak a single word after arriving at the valley, causing him to wonder if the man had been mute since birth. What was even more surprising was that this mysterious man seemed to have an elephant constitution. He could silently stand on guard for an entire day without being exhausted. In Han Li's heart, only the word freak could be used to describe this mysterious figure. He had once tried to communicate with this man, but the mysterious figure was akin to a block of wood, eliciting no response no matter what Han Li said to him. Han Li truly felt that Dr. Mo was amazing for being able to train a person to an extent where the person became similar to a puppet. The mysterious figure had no weaknesses or emotions. In addition, it was equipped with Herculean strength and was completely obedient to Dr. Mo's orders. This was Han Li's judgment regarding the mysterious man Dr. Mo brought back from his travels. Han Li knew that this mysterious man could very well be used by Dr. Mo to suppress him in the future, but despite of this, he was unable to find a solution or a weakness to exploit. The only thing that aroused Han Li's suspicion was that he could vaguely feel a sense of familiarity whenever he viewed the mysterious man's back. It was as if he had encountered this man somewhere before. However, no matter how hard he pondered, he could not recall why this man's back seemed so familiar to him. After a while, Han Li let out a sigh and he closed his door. Returning back to his residence, he knew that unless Dr. Mo gave a different order, the mysterious man would likely continue standing on guard without resting. Feeling slightly confused in his heart, Han Li decided not to worry anymore and jumped onto his bed, laying his head on his interlocked fingers. On his bed, Han Li slowly closed his eyes as he tried to organize his thoughts and memories of the events that had transpired today. He repeatedly dissected and analyzed the techniques that Senior Disciple Li taught him until he could grasp the essence behind them. This was an effect of Han Li's fifth layer of cultivation in the Eternal Spring Arts, eidetic memory. Taking full advantage of his eidetic memory, Han Li crammed as many martial arts techniques as he could get hold of into his brain, analyzing them over and over. His eidetic memory was what caused Li Feiyu to call him a genius. 2 months ago, Han Li had used medicine that he concocted to forcefully break into the fifth layer of the Eternal Spring Arts. Both the Yellow Dragon Pellet as well as the Gold Essence Pill had incredibly strong medical effects that widely surpassed Han Li's estimation. These two concocted pills could be considered priceless treasures. However, he had already consumed over half of his stock. From what left, Han Li estimated that it should be barely enough for him to break through to the sixth layer of the Eternal Spring Arts. Rubbing his hands in glee, he wondered what surprises the sixth layer of the Eternal Spring Arts had in store for him. There was only half a year left until Dr. Mo's time limit. Although Han Li had learned some martial arts from Li Feiyu, he was unable to combine the martial arts techniques with his true qi. He could at most display the forms, but he could not manifest the true might behind the martial arts techniques he learned from Li Feiyu. Against clumsy and weak people, it was more than enough to deal with them. However, if he wanted to fight against Dr. Mo with such low-level skills, it would be very laughable. It was the same as hitting a dog with a meat bun, producing no effects at all. Just thinking about this caused worry to arise in Han Li's heart. How troublesome! The Eternal Spring Arts enhanced his body in multiple ways, but it couldn't be used for battle or slaughter. Now, it seemed like he could only depend on the blinking sword art. hoping that it would create a miracle and give him a chance to survive whatever ordeal would take place. On an afternoon 10 days after their agreement, Han Li sneaked out of God Hand Valley in order to meet Li Feiyu. In actuality, Han Li couldn't have snuck out even if he tried. Dr. Mo was aware of Han Li's every movement and simply let Han Li move with unrestricted freedom. The amount of freedom he was granted initially caused Han Li to be suspicious of Dr. Mo's intentions, but after leaving the valley several times without detecting any signs of his movements being tracked, Han Li began to feel relieved. Reassured, he continued to carry out his own plans within God Hand Valley. After a long period of deliberation, Han Li gradually deduced the reason why Dr. Mo granted him so much freedom. Dr. Mo had been patient and accommodated Han Li's needs because it was in his best interest to do so. Although Dr. Mo used his 2 trump cards, the insect corpse pill as well as the lives of his family, to threaten Han Li, he knew that such methods would not be able to fully control his disciple. Han Li would only feel vengeance in his heart, thus causing his cultivation progress to be half-hearted. Therefore, if Dr. Mo did not restrict Han Li's freedom, Han Li would no longer feel as oppressed or have a shadow over his heart. After all, even though Dr. Mo wanted Han Li to cultivate the eternal spring arts, there was no way he could tie Han Li up and forced him to cultivate at knife point. After Han Li deduced the reason, his guts got bigger and bigger. In the past, he would try his best to sneak out of the valley, without alerting Dr. Mo. But now, he would just swaggering walk out of the valley. On the surface, Han Li seemed not to be affected by Dr. Mo's hidden surveillance, but in reality, he was extremely cautious to not reveal what he was scheming. After he walked out of the valley, Han Li activated his eternal spring arts, causing his perception to rise to an unearthly level. His heightened perception could accurately register any living being within a radius of about 30 meters. Han Li believed that even if Dr. Mo was secretly watching him, there was no way Dr. Mo could escape from being detected. Although Han Li knew that it was impossible for him to win in a direct confrontation against Dr. Mo, he was confident that his 5 senses surpassed Dr. Mo's own senses. After walking for some time, Han Li cautiously entered the previous hiding spot where he and Li Feiyu had enjoyed the refreshing bath earlier. The moment he entered, Han Li noticed that Li Feiyu had already arrived and was sitting next to the pond. Li Feiyu had lowered his head, observing his bare legs soaking in the cooling water pond. Pu tong, he kicked his legs above the surface of the water, causing the pond to be disturbed by small waves. Li Feiyu lost himself in the excitement of his unusually childish actions. When Li Feiyu heard the sound of Han Li entering, he did not even turn his head and complained straight away. "Junior disciple Han, you are getting more and more late to our meetings, making me wait more than half a day every time. Can't you try to arrive earlier?" "Sorry, Han Li flicked the mud stains off his robes as he tried to explain more. "Catch this." Li Feiyu did not wait for Han Li to finish his explanations before tossing a large bundle towards him. "What is this? Is this something delicious?" Han Li asked, but after grabbing the bundle, he could feel the hard and unyielding objects stored inside. They didn't seem like food that could be eaten. "You only know how to eat. Didn't you want me to get you the manual for the blinking sword art?" Li Feiyu glared at Han Li. "What? This is a sword manual? Are you sure you are not mistaken? Did you accidentally grab a stone from your backyard?" Han Li hoisted up the huge bundle. An expression of disbelief could be seen in his face. "So heavy." Han Li exerted his strength to hoist the bundle, but it was so heavy that he fell over. "Ha ha." Li Feiyu began to laugh wildly, unable to suppress it any longer. He rolled on the ground, laughing his ass off in childish glee. Han Li suspiciously glanced at Li Feiyu before staring at the huge bundle once again. Peng. A sound rang out as he kicked the huge bundle. It seemed like there really was a book wrapped inside. No longer paying attention to Li Feiyu, he squatted beside the large bundle and used his hands to feel what was inside. He quickly stopped. Wasting time to guess the contents of the bundle was an extremely foolish action. A pair of clean, white palms grasped the complicated knot of the bundle. Using all of his fingers, he forced the knot open. Pop-pow! The crisp sound of clapping hands rang out. Hanli did not immediately open the bundle. Instead, he turned his head and stared at his evil, laughing friend, Li Feiyu. It was unknown when, but Li Feiyu had already stopped laughing and put on his shoes. Currently, he was furiously clapping his hands while cheering for Hanli, oblivious to the pain from his red-tinged palms. Excellent. Every time I see you execute the silk wrapping palms, I find it incredible. That technique seems to have been designed for you alone. Since the time that I taught to you, only a span of 2 months has passed. Li Feiyu continued clapping his hands and praising Hanli. Don't tell me that in order to see me demonstrating that technique, you purposely tied a convoluted knot on such a large bundle, asked Hanli, slightly agitated. Of course not. Once you open the bundle, you'll understand. Li Feiyu's smiling countenance suddenly turned serious. Curious and bewildered as to why Li Feiyu would suddenly speak with such a tone, Hanli cast his gaze onto the bundle once more. He deliberated for a moment before stretching his index finger and middle finger, lightly grasping the edge of the item inside the bundle, and dragging the hidden item out in the open. This is, beads of sweat appeared on Hanli's head as his 2 eyes almost popped out of their socket. How is it? Are you shocked? Li Feiyu slowly walked towards Hanli, patting him on his shoulder. At a loss for words, Hanli stiffly turned his body, and looked straight at Li Feiyu. Why are you looking at me with that expression? There's no way I'll marry you, alright. Li Feiyu laughingly teased Hanli. After hearing Li Feiyu's words, Hanli cleared his mind. I want to make it clear between us. From this moment on, I don't know you, nor have you met me before. Hanli's voice got louder in intensity as he roared furiously. I don't know if my vision is blurry or if you've gone insane. You actually stole half of the 7 Supreme Division secret manuals. If you're discovered, both of us will suffer a fate worse than death. As he hollered at Li Feiyu, Hanli pointed his finger at the pile of secret manuals in front of him. On the top left-hand corner of the manuals were several characters written in gold. 7 Supreme Division, Secret Library. Seeing that Hanli became furious, Li Feiyu did not get angry. Instead, Li Feiyu remained indifferent. He tilted his head, stuck his pinky into his ear, and concentrated on cleaning his ear. Hanli's reaction was an appropriate and expected one. After Hanli had vented his anger, he saw that Li Feiyu remained as brazen as a city wall, almost as if he had not heard any of Hanli's remarks. Hanli calmed down, sensing that something was off. You are not a fool, nor are you an egomaniac. You wouldn't do anything that would get yourself killed. You must tell me what your reason was behind such a reckless action right now, Hanli gravely demanded. Li Feiyu, seeing that Hanli's anger was quickly being replaced once again by reason, felt somewhat regretful. He assumed a wronged and pitiful appearance and repeatedly complained of this injustice by shouting, Heavens! I'm being wrongly accused. A moment ago, I was actually about to give you an explanation, but you didn't even give me a chance to open my mouth. Now you're complaining about me. Am I truly no longer a person in your eyes? This kind of whining was obviously fake. Anyone who took a quick glance at this farce would feel annoyed after seeing through the act. Hanli also could not help but think of taking advantage of the situation and stepped forward, fiercely kicking Li Feiyu, who was resembling a tea-eating dog. Give me less acting and more explaining. Quickly. You scoundrel! If the junior disciples that admire you see your lazy appearance, your image as a powerful and confident fighter would be completely shattered. Hanli gave him a bit of a mocking expression. Hanli currently had no time to vent his anger and argue with Li Feiyu. If this secret exchange was not handled well, the two of them would face enormous consequences. Li Feiyu seemed to realize what Han Li was thinking at this moment and no longer ridiculed or denounced him. Rather, he lazily walked over to the bundle and picked up a rare book. After standing up straight, his face had a mysterious radiance. With a smile that was simultaneously not a genuine smile, he handed the book over to Han Li. Afterwards, signaling with his eyes, Li Feiyu beckoned Han Li to look at the book's cover. Han Li reached out with his hand to receive the very thin and rare book, giving Li Feiyu a look filled with doubt. He was at a bit of a loss, not knowing what sort of crafty scheme Li Feiyu was plotting. "Open it and take a look for yourself. If you do, you'll understand everything." Li Feiyu deliberately used a mysterious tone in order to coax Han Li into examining the book. "What, you can't say it outright? What's the point of trying to keep it a mystery?" Although hesitation was evident on Han Li's face, he flipped through the pages of the book. He opened the cover, revealing the first page of the rare manual. The top of the page, neatly written in black and white, were 3 large words: Blinking Sword Art. N. Han Li was slightly astounded. Han Li was astonished that the first book Li Feiyu had given to him was exactly what he desired. "Don't lose your focus. Come and see the rest of the books." Li Feiyu tossed over a few nearby rare manuals in succession. Han Li caught the books one by one and was completely stunned after quickly skimming through their entirety. All of their titles were clearly written with black and white characters: Blinking Sword Art. Only after a long while had passed did Han Li lift his gaze from the books in his hands. Pointing his finger at the large pile of secret manuals on the ground, Han Li asked while stammering, You cannot possibly tell me that these are all manuals for Blinking Sword Art." "I am very sorry, Junior Disciple Han. You have indeed guessed correctly." Li Feiyu shrugged his shoulders and spread his hands, his face wearing an expression of helplessness. Although Li Feiyu seemed apologetic, his feelings did not coincide with his words. The corner of his mouth rose faintly as he derived pleasure from Han Li's frustration. "This is impossible. There are almost 100 books here, so how could all of these possibly be manuals for the Blinking Sword Art?" Unable to stomach Li Feiyu's cheap tricks, Han Li questioned Li Feiyu because he was filled with great doubt. "You're asking me? Who was I even supposed to ask in order to verify that they were the right manuals without getting caught? I was at the corner of the 7 Supreme Division's library when I suddenly came upon so many rare manuals sharing the same name. I, too, was shocked." Li Feiyu rolled his eyes and mumbled to himself, giving off the appearance of having lingering trauma. Soon after, he saw Han Li's dumbfounded expression and couldn't help but laugh heartily. Li Feiyu would later say that seeing Han Li suffer such a shock was indeed a rare and impressive sight. Ordinarily, Han Li's face was always calm and composed, as if he always had a card up his sleeve. For Han Li to be shocked was near impossible. At this moment, Han Li had such a numb, foolish look that made Li Feiyu feel that these past few days had been well worth the taxing effort. After a moment, Han Li had at last cleared his mind. He tightly grabbed several books with his hands and lowered his head, deep in thought. Then, with a thought, he looked up and asked neither slowly nor rushed, "Did you count how many manuals were in the bundle? In total, how many manuals did you bring?" Han Li once again asked. "Naturally, I counted the manuals multiple times. Altogether, there are 74 books, all with the same name." Li Feiyu immediately replied, without any hesitation. "If we don't know the exact number of manuals and fail to return 1 or 2 books, we might draw ourselves unwanted attention, which might prove troublesome," Han Li immediately explained. He softly pinched the somewhat yellow pages, slowly turning them over as he carefully schemed one of the secret manuals in his hand. The crisp sound of pages flipping was pleasant to Han Li's ears. However, Li Feiyu hated that sound. He ignored Han Li, who was concentrating on reading, and walked towards the mountain spring. He pulled out a long saber from the mud and started practicing. Han Li glanced over at him. Seeing his friend's overwhelming energy, Han Li stopped paying attention to Li Feiyu's movements and shifted his concentration back to the book in his hands. Han Li could read at a shocking speed of 10 lines per glance. He quickly finished the thick book and grabbed another book without even lifting his head to look. He kept his eyes partly closed while reading, showing a pensive expression from time to time. His eyes were glued to the book's pages and unwilling to detach themselves for even a single moment. The way that his head followed his gaze and moved back and forth gave him the appearance of an elegant intellectual. As time flew by, Han Li rapidly browsed through the Blinking Sword Art's many manuals. When he finished reading the 11th manual, he suddenly stopped and threw the book back in his bag. He closed his eyes to rest for a little bit. Once he felt better, he sat down cross-legged and started cultivating the eternal spring arts, striving to comprehend all the information he had just read. Han Li's facial expression shifted back and forth from excited and lively to serious and dispirited. Not knowing how much time had passed, Han Li finally opened his eyes and was shocked by what he saw in front of him. He didn't realize that Li Feiyu had sneaked up so close to his face while his eyes had been closed. Li Feiyu was in such close proximity that their noses had almost touched. "What are you doing? Aren't you supposed to be practicing with your saber? Junior disciple Han, can't you see what time it is right now? You're asking a stupid question." Li Feiyu pulled back his body and twitched his lips. Han Li realized just then that the sunlight had dimmed. He lifted his head and looked up. The sky was currently a bluish-gray color, which meant that it was already evening. Cough. Time has really flown by while I was cultivating. I didn't notice that it was this late already. Han Li stood up and moved around a little bit. So? Did you find anything interesting in the book? Li Feiyu looked at Han Li passionately, hoping that Han Li could tell him about the blinking sword art. It's not bad. I think this technique will suit me. Huh? What do you mean not bad? Tell me the actual truth, said Li Feiyu in a slightly dissatisfied tone. Specifically, these rare books are a combination of different techniques. In other words, there is no full set in here. They have all been pieced together from different martial arts styles, Han Li slowly explained. Then what is the meaning of the name Blinking Sword Art? Is it even an actual sword art? Why is the name so strange? Li Feiyu was still unsatisfied by Han Li's response, so he kept asking questions. Blinking sword art actually exists, but the manuals that pertain to it are only a small portion within the big mash-up, Han Li said with patience. As for the name of the blinking sword art, there is a special reason for it. What reason? Why can't you say it all at once? Stop talking sentence by sentence, you are just like the old people in town. Li Feiyu glared at Han Li, he couldn't stand Han Li's slow explanation. At Li Feiyu's urging, Han Li couldn't do anything else but speed up his clarification. According to the books, this sword art manipulates light to affect the opponent's eyesight, thereby giving the user a chance to land a decisive blow. It often makes your opponents lose their lives the moment they blink, hence the name Blinking Sword Art. There is actually such a strange sword art. There are quite a few eccentric martial artists in this world. Li Feiyu showed a lot of interest after listening, but quieted right after Han Li's next sentence. This sword art has 3 restrictions. It cannot be practiced by those who have cultivated true qi, those who lack perseverance, or lastly, those without talent. When Li Feiyu heard the first requirement, he immediately gave up on cultivating the sword art. His true qi was already trained to a formidable stage. There was no way that he would be willing to disable his own internal strength to practice this new skill, which he knew next to nothing about. Since he had completely lost interest in the rare books, Li Feiyu didn't want to stay there any longer. He stood up and was getting ready to leave, but before he left, he warned Han Li to copy the books as soon as possible so he could bring back all the original copies when they next met. Even though these manuals weren't valued very much by other people, if they disappeared for a long time, it would still attract attention. Not long after Li Feiyu left, Han Li left the place as well. The whole landscape of the mountainous region was covered by layers of fog, causing it to be slightly dark. A forest of thistles grew on both sides of the narrow mountain paths. When a gust of mountain wind blew through the forest, a hualala sound would be emitted. The leaves on the branches on both sides of the path would flutter about frenziedly, akin to bared fangs and dancing claws. On the somewhat seemingly sinister mountain road, Han Li rushed toward God Hand Valley. Because he left mountain when the sun was beginning to dim, the sky was completely dark by the time he walked halfway to the valley. If it hadn't been for his eternal spring arts, which sharpened his night vision, Han Li wouldn't have been able to rush down the mountain in this dark environment. After all, this small road was not well tread. The road was filled with dangerously placed twists and turns. If one were not careful, an accident was likely to occur, thereby claiming his or her fragile life. Walking in the pitch-black forest, Han Li heightened his senses. Ordinary humans wouldn't be able to clearly see the path in front of them, but for Han Li, it was as clear as day. Despite his advantage, Han Li continued to be cautious. His caution was not honed by hunting ferocious wild beasts, but rather developed into a habit by hiding from Dr. Mo. After the Seven Mysteries sect relocated to the Rainbow Celestial Mountains, the beasts and creatures inhabiting the mountains and forests were eradicated in order to ensure the safety of the sect members. In addition to the ferocious beasts, even normal wild animals, such as the venomous snakes, had been hunted and turned into food for the disciples. Han Li's vigilance was not a part of his natural personality. He had developed it after experiencing Dr. Mo's schemes so that he could prevent any unwanted dangers. The mountain's bone-chilling wind got stronger and stronger, giving off a shrill sound that caused his hair to stand on end. The distant Han Li, upon sensing the wind, hastened his pace as he stepped across the boundary that marked the edge of the forest. He lightly sighed. Walking alone in this pitch dark made his heart grow heavy. Han Li quickened his pace once more, increasing his stride in order to leave the forest as soon as possible. All of a sudden, a strong gust of wind blew towards him. After enduring the strong gust of wind, Han Li paused as if he had discovered something bizarre. He furrowed his brows and tilted his neck, as if he was trying to listen for something. Han Li's expression quickly turned serious. He heard the sound of footsteps echoing in the distance. Although the footsteps were extremely light and the owners of the footsteps were far away from him, Han Li could determine that there were two individuals rushing closer towards his direction. He lightly leapt away and hid himself in the forest next to the mountain path without making a single sound. There was a large tree about 30 meters away from the path. Han Li hid himself behind the tree, curling himself into a ball. If one were to examine the tree from the front, he or she would not be able to find any traces of Han Li. It was only after finding a good hiding spot that Han Li gradually began to calm down. This time, Han Li was not being overly sensitive, there was something truly strange going on. It was highly illogical for two people to prowl around a remote location in the middle of the night. Han Li was 80% positive that the two mysterious figures were hiding something fishy up their sleeves. Han Li did not want the mysterious figures to kill him for discovering their secret, even if he did so by accident. However, if there were no dangers facing Han Li, then there would be no problem for him to eavesdrop on their secrets. Han Li was no hypocrite, he merely understood that if good fortune delivered itself to his doorstep, he would be a fool not to take advantage of it. Descending the mountains, arrange well, time people, Commander. Waves of low-sounding voices drifted over from far away. At this moment, the mountain wind was blowing extremely strongly. As a result, most of the words had been scattered by the wind, leaving only a small portion of the conversation that made its way into Han Li's ears. Han Li was astounded to think that he had managed to discover a portion of their secret. In this region, the only person with the title of commander was the Golden Wolf Qidian from the Feral Wolf Gang. This person had great enmity with the Seven Mysteries sect. Now that Han Li had heard his name in this remote location, it provided much food for thought. Jia Tianlong was a ruthless, blood-drinking demonic figure in the eyes of the Seven Mysteries sect's disciples. Rumors told that he was a broad-shouldered man with a fat waist, long teeth, and a livid face. He supposedly ate human flesh and drank human blood 3 times a day. Many of the Seven Mysteries sect's junior disciples were frightened out of their wits just by hearing the rumors of such a devilish figure. However, according to Li Feiyu, the rumors were far from the truth. Contrary to the rumors, Jia Tianlong was skinny and weak with exquisite facial features. He was quite young, in his early 30s. The rumors regarding how he ruthlessly killed people, however, were true. Jia Tianlong could not be judged by his appearance. After all, based on his facial features alone, no one would expect him to be able to control the other members of the gang. Han Li gathered his thoughts as he tried to remember all that he knew about Jia Tianlong. Sucking in a cold breath, he curled up even tighter, trying to lower the sound of his breathing. This time. Steal, list of names, kill. Another part of the conversation drifted over, clearer than before. The 2 mysterious figures were getting closer and closer to Han Li. Han Li did not even dare to breathe loudly. He knew that if he were to be discovered now, only death would await him. The 2 of them were likely spies from the Feral Wolf gang, and they would definitely not let an outsider know of their secret. Plan, must, not, quickly. Gradually, the voices of these 2 mysterious figures got even lower. It seemed like they had reached the crux of their discussion, which meant that they were about to reveal the most crucial information. After a short moment, the voices got louder again, but Han Li could not hear them clearly, he could only hear the sound of the mountain wind blowing through. The outlines of these 2 mysterious figures passed by Han Li and gradually disappeared into the distance. Han Li still did not dare to make any movements for a long period of time. Only after activating the Eternal Spring Arts and determining that there was no one near him in a 30-meter radius did he slowly reveal himself. This time around, he had avoided certain death. Luckily for him, he managed to discover the movements of these 2 spies early on. If Han Li had met them face to face, he would surely have been killed to protect their secret. Even worse, based on his own martial skills, he did not even have a single shred of hope that he would survive such a confrontation. Han Li stood motionlessly at the same location. Lost in his thoughts, his fingers lightly rubbed his chin while he gazed at the direction where the 2 spies had disappeared. From the fragments of the secret conversation he heard, he could gauge that in the near future, the Feral Wolf gang would undertake some action that would prove greatly detrimental to the Seven Mysteries sect. There was a high probability that this action would have a close connection with the list of names that was previously mentioned. What surprised him the most was that Han Li had already identified the identity of one of the figures despite of not being able to see their facial features. Even though the 2 mysterious figures had not spoken much, Han Li could match one of their low voices to the kitchen steward on the mountain of the Seven Mysteries sect. The steward, who had sold rabbits to Han Li back then, gave him a low impression. He had a mustache and an ignorant face, and he loved to take advantage of others. To think that he was actually a spy from the Feral Wolf gang once again reminded Han Li that one could never be too cautious. But reflecting back upon it, this was something to be expected. Only with a position such as a kitchen steward could a spy been able to enter and leave the mountains and pass along any news that he or she had obtained without arousing any suspicions. However, Han Li was quite unfamiliar with the voice of the other spy. He must have never met this person before. However, judging from the spy's voice, his age must be relatively young, around 20 years old. Unfortunately, in order to ensure his own safety, Han Li didn't dare to steal a glance. He feared that these 2 men practiced martial skills that could detect his spying gaze, enabling them to be aware of nearby outsiders. The potential gains were not worth the potential losses. After this slightly dangerous event, the trip after became quite safe. Han Li finally returned home after his regular supper time. As always, Dr. Mo mysteriously paid him a visit and gave him a glance that lacked any interest. Aside from delivering a few concocted medicines, he normally left Han Li to do as he wished. Han Li seemed as if he had not noticed the medicines that Dr. Mo had delivered. They were all created from rare medicinal ingredients that were gathered from his previous expedition away from the mountain. Han Li believed that Dr. Mo had abandoned his expectations of him and had some other malevolent scheme prepared. For now, Han Li completely disregarded the precious medicine Dr. Mo had delivered. But in order to avoid raising suspicion from Dr. Mo, he pinched his nose and swallowed it down. He threw away any suspicion that the medicines were laced with poison. Currently, any harm Dr. Mo inflicted onto Han Li would only be hurting himself. With regards to overhearing the feral Wolfgang spies, Han Li thought of the best method to deal with them on the way back to his residence. Although he wasn't deeply passionate towards the Seven Mysteries sect, he was halfway to becoming an inner disciple. How could he possibly be impartial toward a harmful affair toward the Seven Mysteries sect before his eyes and ignore it completely? He had long thought of a best candidate to handle this matter: Li Feiyu, the famous senior disciple Li. According to Han Li's observation, perhaps the reason Li Feiyu consumed the essence extraction pill was because he greatly valued being in the center of attention far greater than a common man and possessed no small amount of ambition. He had always dreamed of entering the upper divisions of the Seven Mysteries sect, further becoming the focus of attention. Han Li had previously suspected that Li Feiyu probably thought he was in the last stage of his life, and thus he became even more frantic and hungry for fame. If Han Li allowed Li Feiyu to perform a large contribution to the Seven Mysteries sect, Li Feiyu would certainly be excited to no end. This way, Han Li would be able to repay Li Feiyu for stealing the sword manuals. Thinking of the blinking sword art, Han Li felt a wave of emotion. Han Li did not tell any lies regarding the blinking sword art to his good friend. This sword art truly did not suit Li Feiyu. However, Han Li did not reveal many of the details. An essential rule of survival was that one should always keep a few secrets, regardless of who they were being kept from. Although Li Feiyu and Han Li seemed to have a close relationship, it was hardly exceptional. However, the contents written in these secret manuals were quite different from common martial teachings. It seemed to Han Li that, rather than to say it was a sword art, it would be more appropriate to call it sword ingenuity. It was a complete integration of weather, timing, favorable positioning, and secretive assassination techniques against all kinds of factors and people. Such a skill was rarely seen. It was pure killing skill. As soon as the sword was drawn, death approached. These books describe different environments, times of day, and the utilization of diligently practiced secretive sword skills. There were all kinds of sure kill techniques that would cut down an enemy in a single strike. The manuals taught those that learned these sword skills to make use of every tree and strand of grass in the terrain, as well as light rays of all intensities and angles, in order to hinder the opponent's vision. During the split second the opponent was weakened, the user would take advantage of it and kill them in an instant. This was a mysterious technique that required much attention and skill to execute. Without the slightest talent, it would be impossible to understand the sword art. Therefore, those who learned this mysterious technique must excel in the five senses. Their vision and hearing must far exceed that of an ordinary person by many levels if there were to be the promise of even the slightest results. If only the aforementioned conditions were enough, there would inevitably be a few disciples who would covet the blinking sword art's formidable power and choose to cultivate it immediately after reaching the minimum requirement. However, mastering the sword art required an excessive amount of effort. In addition, it had even harsher requirements. Those who cultivated this mysterious technique could not possess pure inner strength. Otherwise, their body would suffer from complications when trying to execute the technique. This made cultivating the sword art quite difficult. Even if someone with true qi was lucky enough to succeed, if the true qi in their body became too vigorous during actual combat, the sword maneuvers would unwittingly produce deformations. These deformities left large gaps for the opponent to take advantage of, thereby causing life-threatening calamities. These requirements basically severed away the majority of those attempting to cultivate the technique. In Jiang Hu there was a common saying, to practice the fist and neglect skill will end with one's effort in futility. To not practice inner strength was an enormous taboo. Anyone who would abandon their cultivation of true qi and spread their name with ineffable swordplay would truly be the laughingstock of Jiang Hu. Therefore, only the remaining few still had the intention to continue cultivating the technique. However, even if those individuals had plenty of talent and had no problem with abandoning true qi, the final difficult barrier would thoroughly dispel their intentions of continuing down this path. The final obstacle was the excessively complex nature of the blinking sword art and the painstaking memorization of the meticulous conditions in which each of the sword maneuvers within the sword manuals could be applied. Seeing such a large pile of thick secret manuals would intimidate any average person at first glance. Each sword manual represented a sword maneuver, and each sword maneuver could be broken into hundreds of sword forms. Every sword form must be carefully selected for different environments and different times of day. To fully master the blinking sword arts, one had to make complete use of different techniques for every situation. The tremendous quantity of sword skills, let alone cultivation, would make one's head ache. Not to mention that this further required the complete memorization and comprehension of every sword maneuver and sword form. The previously mentioned abnormal requirements have obstructed an innumerable number of motivated disciples, making them endlessly curse in their heart at the elder who had established the sword art. With the passage of time, the Seven Mysteries sect gradually lost interest in this sword technique. Believing it impossible for someone to train in this martial technique, many disciples thought that the elder had baselessly and casually fabricated these martial teachings as he was facing death's door. Otherwise, why would there be these excessive requirements? This was deliberately designed to be difficult for disciples that were unaware of how things stood. As a result, these secret manuals were put away on a shelf, no longer catching anyone's interest. Those who complained did not know that the elder who created this particular sword art had a very deep and profound level of skill. However, his meridians were injured during a battle against another cultivator of Jiang Hu. As such, he had been unable to cultivate true qi. In order to protect his status in the sect, the elder had kept the matter a secret. From then on, he acted mysteriously, pretending that he had overwhelming strength to deceive all of the members in the sect. Ever since then, however, it had been undeniable that he lacked the ability to protect himself. He had to rely on wit and experience from that moment on, protecting himself through deception. That era was when the Seven Mysteries sect stood at the height of its power. When this elder realized that his power would never recover, he became depressed and organized many covert raids on smaller sects. He acted behind his superiors' back by using deceptive schemes that hid his movements. During the raids, he forcibly seized many secret martial arts manuals, hoping to find a top-level skill that he could cultivate without true qi. After many years of research, the elder did indeed discover many mysterious techniques that didn't require true qi. However, none of them suited him. He was greatly depressed. However, this elder had talent and intelligence that far surpassed the norm. Suffering from depression and frustration, he decided to combine all the unfathomable martial techniques that he had discovered, thus creating his own set of top-tier skills. Once the notion appeared in his mind, he was fully obsessed by it. He intended to create a special set of techniques unique to himself. This was something that all martial artists aspired to do. With his full attention and effort, he threw himself wholeheartedly into research. Eventually, fearing distractions, he went into closed-door meditation and did not bother himself with matters of the section. Creating a set of skills was an extremely difficult thing to do. Not to mention the fact that the skill he intended to create had to be a top-tier skill that did not require true qi to execute. Creating this unprecedented martial skill was a process filled with many hardships that vastly surpassed his expectations. However, his determination and willpower was beyond that of a normal human. After half a lifetime's worth of efforts that he expended over the course of 10 years, he finally created his skill, the blinking sword art. That elder was extremely excited, spreading the joyous news to his sect members. However, he discovered that the Seven Mysteries sect had regressed tremendously and was now a shadow of its former self. The Seven Mysteries sect been attacked and surrounded by an alliance of various sects, it could be wiped out at any moment. The elder was furious and alarmed upon hearing the news. Using the skill he had just created, he unleashed its godly might, killing many top-tier opponents and terrifying those that remained. Under the encirclement of the various sects, he managed to slaughter a bloody path out to safety, creating immense merit for the Seven Mysteries sect. Regretfully, although the sect managed to avert the disaster, the elder was at the brink of death. He could only pass on his newly created skill and place it in the Seven Supreme Hall, leaving it behind for the other disciples before he passed away. What was even more regretful was that, even after all these years, none of the following generations had managed to successfully cultivate this particular skill other than Hanli. As a result, this bright pearl was hidden under the dust, never to see the light of the sun. Hanli had no idea of the history behind the blinking sword art. Even if he knew, he would not be moved. To him, as long as this particular sword art could allow him to protect his own life when he clashed against Dr. Mo, it was already sufficient. Why care about its history? Its creation process? Hanli had no interest in such mundane details. He was a practical man. Hanli would not be interested in spending his time and energy to understand things that had no benefits to him. In his own residence, Hanli lit an oil lamp as he laid in front of the table. He repeatedly flipped through the pages of the manual underneath the candle light. He had no intentions of copying the manuals. What he was planned to do was to use his eidetic memory and memorize all the contents within the secret manuals. This way, he could always have the contents in his mind without arousing suspicions. Regarding Dr. Mo, Hanli still maintained a high sense of alertness. He was not foolish enough to think that he would be safe because Dr. Mo had slackened his supervision. If Dr. Mo knew about all the secret manuals he had in his residence, wouldn't all his plans come to naught? Under the dusky yellow light from the lamp, crackling sounds rang out, reminding Hanli that he had been studying for a long time and that it was time for him to get some rest. However, Hanli had no intention of stopping. He fully immersed himself in the contents of the secret manuals, absorbing all the information they contained into his mind. As the light popped, a shadow appeared on the wall and began to sway back and forth in the flickering light. Hanli continued to sit there, immersed in the sword manuals, and didn't budge an inch. His body contrasted sharply with this almost demonic shape. However, if one looked closely, he or she would see a sort of harmony between the two. As time passed, the shadow behind Hanli became fuzzy as it slowly faded away into nothingness. Outside, dawn had broken. Unknowingly, Hanli had spent an entire night studying. Pa! A soft sound rang out as the light from the lamp died out. Only then did Hanli come to his senses. He lifted his head and looked at the oil lamp before glancing at the daylight that shone outside his residence. A bitter smile rose from the bottom of his heart. To think that he had actually spent a day studying and researching killing techniques. He had truly changed from his former self. Hanli lost himself in contemplation for a moment before standing up and stretching his body, causing cracking sounds to ring out. After doing so, he left his residence and went to collect a basin of cold water from the nearby well in order to wash himself. Hanli activated the eternal spring arts, regaining his energy and causing all the fatigue from the previous night to melt away. After a whole night of study and research, Hanli already knew that he had to fully understand the principles behind a set of martial arts techniques. If he did not practice it for at least 8 to 10 years, there was no way he would be able to master it. Even a genius would at least need 2 or 3 years in order to yield some results. Time waits for no one.